That was, I think, a great response, Fabian. We got some more questions coming in. Our next question is from Landon out in Wisconsin. His question is for me. He says, Jennifer, if punishment procedures are not working for a client, would you immediately decide to discontinue it? And how would you resolve this issue? I know Stephanie mentioned earlier that isolation is the worst feeling that any learner could have, and that happens from punishment. I wouldn't discontinue punishment right away, because the student might be feeling just as isolated because of their behaviors. Maybe they're not able to access their peers and socialize with other people because their behaviors are inhibiting that. So instead, I would first check that the punishment procedure is being implemented with fidelity, and then I would review the protocols per Code 4.07 and ensure that there are no environmental variables affecting the implementation of the plan. And if it was determined with data, however, that progress was still not being made, I would then complete some more research on other strategies to incorporate to recommend a more appropriate plan for the learner that was still the least restrictive per Code 4.09. I hope that answers your question, Landon. But we do have another question coming in from Stacy out in Georgia. Her question is for our behavior interventionist, Stephanie. Stacy says, Stephanie, if reinforcement systems and other positive supports are not causing a decrease in behaviors, would you then consider using punishment?
Stephanie, I think is your mic turned on? You got to put your mouth on the mic, and the podcast listeners can hear us.
Sorry.
I thought we lost her for a second.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you're back.
All right, here I am, guys. So I think based off Ethic Code 4.08, and I think Fabian touched on this as well, I mentioned it earlier, regarding the use of punishment procedures, behavior analysts recommend reinforcement rather than punishment. And if punishment procedures are used, we must ensure that aversive procedures are accompanied by an increased level of training, supervision, and oversight. Kind of how we talked about the CPI training earlier. The behavior analysts are to evaluate the effectiveness of the aversive procedure in a timely manner and modify the behavior change program if it's ineffective. So I guess answer to your question, this is tough because I know we're speaking against punishment and we're seeing the negative effects of it, but I think that punishment could potentially be used as a last resort. Yeah, sorry, team.
Okay, common ground. Here we go. Nice. See? This debate ended up being, as we planned, a very nice, relaxed discussion where we're able to see, everyone's viewpoint from a different angle, because, we are providing, research and facts and things that people before us have done. We're not just pulling our opinions out of thin air, So I think this has been a very well-rounded discussion, I think. What do you guys think?
Definitely.
I agree. Yeah. It's been very informative.
Yes, very.
Cool. I know the Twitter is still blowing up with questions, Jennifer, but I think that's all the time we have for questions for this podcast. I want to wrap us up here by summarizing for our listeners what we have found common ground on and what still might be up for debate in the future for another podcast. So,
what does everyone feel like we're agreeing on? I feel like we really have kind of found some common ground.
Yeah, I'm going to say that we can all agree on that there is research on some punishment procedures that are just based in scientific research, and that, it's proven that these can have effects on decreasing problem behaviors, especially for those zero tolerant ones that I touched on in my little spiel.
Yes,
definitely. Yeah.
Definitely.
What do you think we disagree on still that we could still have possible debates on in the future?
Well, one thing that I still think that we haven't found common ground on is the negative effects that punishment can have on a lot of the clients that are receiving them. While we are saying that we are abstaining from the more physical forms of punishment, there still are some psychological effects that should kind of be discussed more and talked about, and we should also try to strive for ways in the future on how to combat those psychological effects from happening.
Yeah.
I 100% agree with that. I definitely enjoyed your your viewpoint and your feedback on giving us those real life situations, those kids in the classroom and what, those side effects can be and what they can be now in the present and what they turn into in the future.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And putting aside, I guess, the negative effects that Jasmine brought up and that I brought up as well, I think we can kind of all agree that punishment procedures could be used as a last resort, unless it jeopardizes with their immediate health and safety of them and those around them. I think punishment, if used correctly and with extensive proper training, could potentially be used as a last resort.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
I agree.
And we would all, like you're saying, Stephanie, we would still always do reinforcement first as the first, attempt. So I think, we're all in agreement on that.
Exactly. I definitely think though, still behavior analysts, we definitely are going to abide by the ethical guidelines and, use reinforcement-based procedures first. But then sometimes, we have to make those split-second decisions where clients are, let's say they're, sorry for being so graphic, but like say they're gouging their eyes out, what are those, when those kind of, intense scenarios, we have to balance between, what is ethical. And like at the point I brought up in my talk, the first goal of client treatment may be reducing those self-injurious or, negative behavior sometimes. And we have to decide very quickly, if, how long is too long to implement a reinforcement-based procedure before we decide, okay, punishment is ethical enough to use here.
Yes.
Okay. And I would also like to say, in regards to Joanna's, the research she mentioned, I definitely think punishment can't always be client-centered because some clients can't advocate for themselves. But the research she mentioned is important, and I'd like to learn more about that.
Okay.
Yeah, I definitely think we kind of disagree on.
Okay, and then something that I agree on was on the getting the proper and continuous training for how for us to be competent in how to implement the punishment procedures, because sometimes we cannot take it seriously or we don't see the seriousness of it. But as RBTs or professionals, we really have to be trained on this in order to how can I say, be ethically driven, in our environment.
You're still getting calls, Fabian.
Oh man,
They're still coming in.
Yeah, I told the listeners we had enough. We don't have enough time for all this.
I know.
Listener, please send out another tweet or an email, and we'd definitely be happy to respond to those messages at a later date. But yes, thank you, Joan. I think we all can definitely agree. We all were shaking our heads when Laurel was discussing, that need for proper and continuous treatment, especially regarding those very invasive, holds that sometimes are indeed warranted, to kind of handle and relax a learner when they're engaging in high magnitude like property destruction and aggression. But once again, those trainings do not put us in those real life scenarios of what we actually face. And sometimes, practitioners are just ad-libbing in a sense of what to do and how to hold those learners, and those definitely can blur the lines between ethical and non-ethical. So I just want to thank all my guests for taking the time to join us today. I think we had a very beneficial, enlightening conversation here. It's very interesting to hear this group of professionals' experiences and thoughts on the use of punishment in ABA. I really enjoyed learning from one another as well as hearing from all our listeners. I hope that my listeners found this podcast to be informative. If you would like to check out any of the resources that we referred to today throughout this podcast, please check out the following websites for more information. And be tuned to turn into next week's podcast, where we'll be discussing the importance of treatment fidelity regarding reinforcement and punish-based interventions. See you guys next time.
Bye.
Having us.
Bye.